Morning, Black family. Hayes here. Going to be streaming Professor Black Truth's Morning of Truth, or it's the Moment of Truth, I'm sorry, and the 7 lies that Rittenhouse and his friends told. Hope you enjoy it.
Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Ever since the uprisings began against anti-Black police violence, there have been a number of people who have been saying that they're going to stop these protests, and a number of them have made it clear they were going to do it by killing the protesters. And this is how Kyle Rittenhouse came to be in Kenosha and carrying out a mass shooting. But there were a number of lies that Rittenhouse himself told, and these lies have been amplified and added to by his lying supporters. Here's just a few of them. Lie number 1. Rittenhouse claimed that he never intended to kill anyone when he crossed state lines to go to Kenosha armed with an AR-15, and his supporters claimed that he wasn't a violent thug. Well, those are just bald-faced lies. Rittenhouse has a well-documented violent history. In July 2020, only 45 days before he went on his mass shooting rampage, Rittenhouse beat up a female classmate after school. This violent attack was caught on video. Apparently, the girl was arguing with someone, not Rittenhouse, but that didn't stop the felonious thug from deciding to jump into it anyway and begin beating the girl viciously. It was only the intervention of some Black citizens that saved this girl from potentially becoming Rittenhouse's first murder victim. But this is something the white media didn't show, and certainly something that all of Rittenhouse's lying supporters decided they weren't going to mention. And as for Rittenhouse's claim that he never intended to kill anyone when he went to Kenosha, that's just an out-and-out lie. Only 2 weeks before his mass shooting spree, Rittenhouse was caught on video saying that he wanted to kill some of the people who were in the streets.
Rittenhouse is not seen in this video, but prosecutors say he is heard. He's heard wishing he could shoot at people he believed were shoplifting. Here is that video in its entirety.
It looks like one of them has a weapon. Bro, I wish I had and start shooting rounds at them.
Not surprisingly, the individuals who were seen on video when Rittenhouse is issuing this threat happen to be Black. Rittenhouse's exact words: "Bro, I wish I had my effing AR. I'd start shooting rounds at them." And then 2 weeks later, that's exactly what he does. He wanted to kill some people, and he made it very clear that he was eager to do so. He planned this out. So this guy goes to where he knows a civil disturbance might occur, so he can intentionally place himself into a situation where he hopes that he can kill some people. So no, it's a lie that Rittenhouse didn't intend to kill anyone. He made it clear that was exactly what he would do if he got the opportunity, and then he deliberately went out of his way by dozens of miles to do exactly that. And as far as his being violent, well, the video speaks for itself. Lie number 2. He didn't obtain the AR-15 illegally. His pal and fellow thug Dominic Black admitted in court that he was the one who bought the assault rifle that Rittenhouse used in his mass shooting. Black admitted the reason that he bought it was to give it to Rittenhouse. And Black admitted that the murderous thug wasn't old enough to buy one himself, so Black carried out a straw man purchase, illegally giving a firearm to someone who wasn't able to get one themselves. That's a crime. The liars claim that Rittenhouse came to have the gun honestly, but straw purchases are not legal. At least they weren't before this trial. On a side note, Dominic Black is set to go on trial himself for having carried out the illegal purchase. The third lie told by Rittenhouse and his supporters. Rittenhouse lied to a camera crew, telling them that he was from the area.
And what about, are you from the area?
But Rittenhouse doesn't live in Kenosha. In fact, he didn't even live in the state of Wisconsin. Rittenhouse lives in Antioch, Illinois, not Kenosha, Wisconsin. He drove over 20 miles across state lines to get to Kenosha. But when he was in front of the cameras, he lied and claimed he was from the area.
Are you from the area?
I am from the area.
Lie number 4. Rittenhouse lied and claimed that he was just an EMT. This was just a white lie, one which the white media gladly spread. Well, when Rittenhouse took to the stand, he was forced to admit that he lied when he claimed to media and bystanders that he was an EMT.
The night of August 25th, you're here in Kenosha, Wisconsin, saying you're an EMT, correct?
Yes.
That was a lie.
Yes.
Man, it seems that nothing that this violent punk said about himself that night was true at all, except that he was armed. Lie number 5. Rittenhouse and his defenders tell the lie that he was in Kenosha because local businesses asked for him to be there. They wanted him to be there. As if anyone's going to believe that businessmen would ask a 17-year-old violent delinquent to come protect their shops. Now that's stupid on its face, and anyone spouting it is clearly lying, but that's what they tried to claim. Rittenhouse himself testified that after he committed his mass shooting, he told the police that he was in Kenosha because he had been hired to protect local businesses. But as with practically everything else that Rittenhouse claimed, when he took the stand, he had to admit that wasn't true either.
And you talked to these owners yourself?
Me and Dominic did.
And did they ask you to come protect the property?
They didn't ask me
Directly.
They didn't ask me directly. They asked Nick Smith.
Okay. And was Nick Smith around for that at that moment?
He wasn't there when me and Dominic were talking to them.
Did you ever personally witness any of these car source folks, Sal or Sam, or any of the folks that were running that business? Did you ever personally witness them ask Nick Smith to guard any of their properties?
No.
Did you ever witness any of them ask anyone to guard any of their properties?
Not that I can recall.
Louis,
Not only had no business owners actually hired him to protect their business, but on the stand, Rittenhouse was forced to admit that he was the one who was soliciting businesses, trying to see if he could get any of them to allow him to bring his guns there so he could prowl the streets pretending to be some tough guy under the guise that he was asked to be there.
And that was shortly after you had sent a text to Sam, right?
Correct.
And you texted him and asked him if you could protect his business that night, correct?
I did.
And in that text you said, I'm more than willing and will be armed, correct?
Yes.
You meant you'd be armed with your AR-15?
Yes.
And you said that me and my brother would both be there armed, correct?
Yes.
By your brother you meant Dominic?
Yes.
He's obviously not legally your brother.
No.
So Rittenhouse and the business owners in the area all have the same testimony that nobody invited him there. Nobody asked him to be there. He invited himself. Fox News and right-wing hate radio ran with that lie because they needed to invent a justification for this violent teen illegally carrying an assault rifle and menacing people with it. So, yet another Kyle Rittenhouse lie exposed. Lie number 6. That Rittenhouse had a legal right to have an AR-15 at his age. This is deliberate confusion caused by the Rittenhouse defenders by intentionally misrepresenting Wisconsin law. Wisconsin does not allow a 17-year-old to have an assault rifle for any reason, with only one exception, a hunting exception. That means they have to be actively hunting. You got to be in the woods looking for some furry animal to shoot. The defense tried this feeble excuse in pretrial motions. The prosecutors said that they would have to submit evidence that the killer was engaged in legal hunting on the streets of Kenosha if they wanted to push that defense. The gun charge was the most damning charge against Rittenhouse. It was crystal clear that he had violated the law with no excuse. He wasn't in Kenosha to hunt, and even if he was, he can't claim he was looking for deer or squirrels in the avenue during a protest march. On the stand, he admitted that he did not buy the AR-15 to use it for hunting.
You didn't pick out the AR-15 for any other reason?
I thought it looked cool, but no.
You didn't pick it out because you wanted to go hunting with it, did you?
No.
The only way Rittenhouse could avoid doing prison time would be if the judge just decided to
Which one
ignore the law altogether and throw the
he's
gun
knocking
charge
down
out.
all
because the
these
jury
lies this
wouldn't.
motherfucker told.
The goal was not to have it reduced. They needed to have it thrown out altogether. Remember, Rittenhouse was a symbol for white supremacy. They needed him to get away scot-free. problem was there was nothing legally that would allow the judge to do that. But it was clear to everyone the judge was biased and prejudiced and corrupt and wanted to see the killer walk. The judge had been flagrantly advertising his bias from day one. So when the asinine Hail Mary motion from the defense about a hunting exception was offered, the judge got the message. This would be the lie that he could hide behind. But even the corrupt Judge Schroeder knew that he couldn't dismiss the gun charge right off the bat. He would have to wait. The DA was also on code to throw the case, but this early in the process, there would surely be public pressure put on the DA to immediately appeal the judge's ruling if he tried to dismiss the gun charge on the grounds of a hunting exception. Obviously, the state's hunting exception isn't an open carry permit for violent 17-year-old thugs, so even this corrupt judge knew he couldn't dismiss the gun charge on those grounds, at least not right away. So instead, the judge told the defense that he would not dismiss the gun charge because he wasn't comfortable making a ruling. After this, the judge didn't question or mention the gun charge's validity until the very end of the trial, just before closing arguments were set to begin. The judge then, after a month of not mentioning the gun charge at all, suddenly declares he's throwing it out. Now, in cases like this, if the prosecution feels the judge has botched a ruling on the legality of the charge, they can immediately appeal to the state's appellate court and ask the court to stop the trial until they issue a ruling on it. But the prosecution can only do that if the judge actually makes a ruling. As I mentioned before, ever since the October 5th pretrial motions, the judge had said nothing on the gun charge other than he didn't feel comfortable making a ruling. The DA can't appeal a botched ruling on a motion if the judge refuses to issue a ruling. And don't think this crooked Schroeder didn't know that. And when the crooked judge finally mustered the nerve to dismiss the gun charge, he knew exactly how this maneuver would look, and he tried to place the blame on the prosecutors initially, saying, "I think it ought to have been mighty clear that I had big problems with this statute." Keep in mind, he'd only mentioned it one time during pretrial motions and then never mentioned it again. The judge then claimed, "I made no bones about that from the beginning, and there always was access to the Court of Appeals all along here." But then the judge realized he'd wrapped himself up in his own lies. Literally in the same sentence, he went from blaming the prosecution to having to admit that he was to blame. Quote, "Well, I guess that's not fair for me to say because I was sitting on it, so shame on me." Shame indeed. But this crooked judge deserves a hell of a lot more than just shame for his flagrant disregarding of the law. This wasn't a botched ruling. This was a deliberate act of colluding with the defense. This judge is the most pitiful excuse for a jurist and a human being that I've seen in some time. So no, the statute Rittenhouse's lawyers offered did not permit him to carry around an AR-15 because it's a hunting exception that they were citing. And Rittenhouse, by his own admission, wasn't in Kenosha to hunt. As he said, he was there to give first aid, even though he lied about being an EMT, and he was there because he'd been hired to protect businesses, even though the business owners themselves said they never hired him and didn't even know him. The judge never said that Rittenhouse had a legal right to carry an assault rifle. He feebly tried to claim instead that the law was vague about that, even though it's not. And finally, lie number 7. That the corrupt Judge Schroeder allowing Rittenhouse to select the jurors himself was not at all unusual and happens routinely. In fact, it's tradition. A number of white supremacists quoted a reporter, Nancy Chen, who posted this information on her Twitter. Quote, "There's been a lot of attention today on Kyle Rittenhouse randomly selecting jury members himself from a tumbler. The judge told the pool reporter that this is a tradition that he has held in his courtroom with the defendant in his cases for 20 years. Now, when you read that, you are supposed to be fooled and misled into thinking, oh, so the judge says that it's his tradition to let the defendant choose the jurors from a tumbler. But that's not true at all. In fact, Schroeder had never done it with any defendant in any trial in his 40 years on the bench. This was a weasel word statement from a corrupt judge, and this incompetent reporter, or should I say repeater, because that's all she does, she just posted it on her Twitter, figuring that no one would challenge it. But she doesn't know the professor. See, I had been scouring the net to see if there was any other case that Schroeder had allowed the defendant to select the alternate jurors themselves, And not only did I not find any case for Schroeder, the white media themselves, in interviews with Wisconsin lawyers who tried cases before Schroeder, including a former DA, they all said that not only has Schroeder never done that before, but that no judge they ever knew of in Wisconsin or any other place had ever allowed the defendant to personally select the alternate jurors. As Robert Gemois, former Portage County prosecutor, said, normally the clerk of court selects the alternate jurors. Another Wisconsin lawyer interviewed by the white media said that in all their years trying cases, it's always the clerk of court or occasionally the judge himself who makes the selection, but they never heard of a defendant being allowed to do it personally. So why was it that this Chen woman was repeating a deliberate lie by omission about defendants choosing the alternate jurors? What was being referred to there was the use of a tumbler, not the defendant personally choosing the names from the tumbler. The Judge Schroeder never allowed anyone to do that in the 40 years he's been on the bench. But those are weasel words that this reporter didn't even look at to vet and didn't care about. I confronted this Chen woman with this fact and asked her to back up her claim that this was a tradition in Schroeder's courtroom. Not surprisingly, she didn't respond. So I put the question to her again, and this time made it clear she puts her credibility on the line by repeating this lie. She felt urged to respond to that, only it wasn't to defend her lying tweet. Instead, she immediately folded. She retreated to blaming the poll reporter for what she herself posted. I replied to her that since she was the one who wrote it, then it falls to her to vet the information, and since she's now been informed that the judge was lying, she must report that. Obviously, there's been no response. This Chen woman knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to mislead people into thinking Schroeder lets every defendant personally select the alternate jurors, when the reality is he's never done that, not even once. I also, on my Twitter, put out an open challenge to any of these Rittenhouse supporters to show one time that any judge has allowed a defendant to personally select their own jurors, not just in Schroeder's court, but in any court anywhere. I haven't gotten even one response. Got a lot of clowns, however, saying it's his court and he can do it any way he wants, but that's the entire point. This judge has claimed that he hasn't been biased and that he hasn't handled this case any differently than he has any of the other cases he's presided over in 40 years. But as with so much else that Schroeder has said, this was just another white lie. Not only did he wildly diverge from his own so-called tradition, but he also diverged from what every other judge does. But by far the biggest lie of all was the trial itself. This wasn't a trial, it was judicial theater, a staged performance put on to fool the public into thinking the corrupt courts of Wisconsin were going to punish what was a clear-cut case of state-sanctioned violence by a teenage gun-toting thug. Don't kid yourself. This DA's office didn't want to prosecute Rittenhouse, but they also wanted to make sure that he was protected against any possible state or federal murder charges. This was the same DA, you'll recall, who refused to prosecute the thug with a badge who tried to murder Jacob Blake. When the protests started, this was the same DA who dug in his heels, and the protests were against this DA's office. So do you truly believe that this DA who was being protested against sees some of the protesters get murdered, and then he wants to actually lock up the murderer? This judge's corruption is well documented as well. Hell, he put it on display for everyone to see because he knows that neither the state bar nor any other authorities are going to punish him. White supremacists are on code. This wasn't a judicial exercise, it was a racial political exercise meant to send the message that the authorities in Kenosha are working hand in hand with armed militias to murder protesters, and they will openly ignore the law to shield the killers from punishment. These killers are operating not merely with the permission of the authorities, but at their behest and with their open collaboration and protection. It's meant to intimidate people against demanding justice. Well, these white supremacists called down the thunder, and now they're getting it. Just yesterday, Eric Jordan and his 16-year-old daughter were in Kenosha, and they brought their assault rifles to protect protesters from the next would-be Rittenhouse. And not surprisingly, not one of those white militia morons dared to try anything. Hell, none of them dared to even so much as show up. All it took was one black man and his 16-year-old daughter, and all of those white supremacists, whether they had badges or not, were under control. And how differently the white media is covering these gun-owning, law-abiding citizens who haven't harmed anyone. They're not heaping any sort of adulatory overtones, nothing about these are citizens protecting the community. None of them talking about all the violence carried out by these white militias, how black people are under siege, nothing to justify their carrying guns in public. They're not celebrating these two like they did with Rittenhouse and his white supremacist militia. No, when it's black people carrying the guns, all of a sudden, well, they say that they're protecting people. It was the protesters who were murdered and wounded last year by Kyle Rittenhouse and his little gang of thugs. And yet the headlines don't say these guys are protecting protesters, because clearly they need protection. Instead, it says they say they're protecting them, as if you can't trust this is suspicious. Yeah, they're making it real clear. These niggers say that they're protecting people, but this is a problem. This is a real problem. No matter what they say, don't believe them. This is dangerous. This is dangerous. We better be suspicious of this. You can't trust a nigger with a gun. You also can't do anything about a black man with a gun either. That's what their real problem is. So all of those Second Amendment hawks and all of those Second Amendment bloviators and the people who just treat the Second Amendment as if it was handed to them by God himself, they're going to be falling real silent. In fact, they already have. None of them are cheering this. None of them are saying, well, this is how it ought to be. You know, if there were more guns on the street, how do you stop a mass shooting like the one that Rittenhouse carried out? You need more guns on the streets. All of a sudden, they're looking and going, well, that girl, you should check out the comments on Fox News about this story. You got the people in the comments going, oh, well, that girl, you know, is she really able to handle that gun, you know? Now they're concerned about teenagers having assault rifles. Now they're concerned. Gee, whatever happened to these right-wing nuts being all hot and bothered to protect other people's businesses or to stop looting? Where's the Kyle Rittenhouse at? Where's Kyle Rittenhouse at now? Why, it's legal for Kyle Rittenhouse to be on the streets with an AR-15. Shouldn't he be there protecting businesses? Where's Kyle Rittenhouse at now? Yeah, he's hiding is where he's at because he knows he's been found out. Whatever happened to the police trying to ambush protesters? When the protesters are armed, the white supremacists, with or without badges, are suddenly on their best behavior. This is how you stop the next Kyle Rittenhouse. So for all the white supremacists out there talking tough about what you would do, well, now the protesters are tooling up. And what's happening is you're not doing anything, which is exactly what we thought. So it's never been about protecting businesses or stopping any imaginary looting. It's always been about these white supremacists trying to murder protesters in their desperate and pathetic attempts to try to stop the tide of justice marching across the nation. White supremacy is getting stomped out, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. And by the way, you'll notice that Mr. Jordan's daughter is only 16 years old. And here she is walking the streets with an assault rifle, protecting the community from white supremacist thugs. Openly carrying, and there's not a damn thing that these white supremacists can do about it. Thanks to corrupt Judge Schroeder, this is the new normal. The hunting exception applies to every teenager, not just the white ones. And now their racist lies have backfired. These are the unintended consequences of telling little white lies. So the lesson here is that whether it be in post-Rittenhouse Kenosha, every case where protesters have been armed, none of them have been died. The white supremacists won't even show up. But that only works when it's clear that you're prepared to use them in your self-defense. A gun is not a deterrent. It's only effective if the person carrying it is actually prepared to use it should they be attacked. These murderous clowns like Rittenhouse and others, they tell themselves the protesters are soft targets. That's the reason that they attack them. After all, they're peaceful protesters. Surely they're not armed. But thanks to the murder committed by trash like Rittenhouse and the authorities making it clear they are boldly standing with the murderers, that's changing. No more Mr. Nice protester. Good day and be one.